Welcome to COVID and Climate Change Correlations, a weekly video podcast where I, Daniel Sanderson, engage in a stimulating conversation with post-Keynesian economist Steve Keen. To another episode of the new economics, COVID and climate correlations. Effectively, it's the Steve Keen show. So here we are, welcoming back Steve Keen. And
at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is 23 degrees. And normally you reverse the numbers, it's at least 32, you know. So this is an incredibly cold Sydney summer, but my room's a bit warm. So I've got to, you know, and besides I slack, I just got something I could throw in quickly when one of my nieces turned up unexpectedly. So
yeah, okay. So how is the family thing going? I mean, you're with your sister, and are you enjoying, you know, the reconnect, I guess?
Yeah, it's good to be back though. Typically, I mean, I came back early, as you know, because of Omicron. I just thought it was going to. It could easily block me traveling back from Thailand to Sydney. My original date was 7th of January. That's still, you know, what, about 2 weeks away. And the way things are going, there could be complete, not so much shutdown, but there won't be enough planes in the air. They're cancelling flights, as you know, in the States all the time. Anyway, I came out, I'll get everything I can done as soon as I can before it spreads too quickly. Well, already 3 people I know have got the damn disease, including a journalist that I met Monday week ago. And so he had to isolate. He let me know on Christmas morning.
Are the cases that you're hearing about, are they what I'm hearing about, that they're more subdued?
Yeah, they're mild. I mean, the only thing, it's clear that the symptoms are milder. I mean, some people end up in hospital, some are still in ICU. And it's still looking like about I'll take a look at the Australian figures and see, but it's not trivial. Okay, there's still quite a number of people saying of an ICU, and the hospitalizations are rising once more. So you can't rule it out. But lots of people are reporting mild symptoms, and the hope is that it's a transition in the evolutionary development of the virus, where you've got something which is highly contagious, and therefore it'll block anything else that comes in, like of that virus, any other strand, and relatively minimal effects. So, like the cold, we all get the cold almost every year. It's far more transmissible than cold. It's about as transmissible as measles, which apparently is the most contagious disease we've ever known. So it's pretty much up there. So that's the hope. The one thing I'm still worried about, and I'm not going to take any experiments until I get enough data to be confident, is what it does with brain damage, because a lot of people, you know, have had a case of Delta or in the other versions beforehand, and then ended up with various degrees of continuous brain damage, and that's really scary. It looks like about 20%. It's more. There's a study I've seen just recently saying that there's a huge statistical study of the UK data. The higher the Scott, I haven't looked at that book yet. Pardon me, mate. I've been caught up writing policy documents for the you liberals. Yeah, the data from the UK, a very large UK state, like about 2 million cases, pretty close. It's only 200,000 cases. I'm not sure the order of magnitude. The more severe the disease, the more brain damage. But about 1 in 5 end up with some symptom, whether that's Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or something in that direction. So I just, I'm not going to let that. It's quite. I mean, I'll take a look and see if I can find the study here. Hang on a sec.
Wow. Okay. So I just want to say that this is first that I've heard about it. But the language you're using with, you know, brain damage, and then some correlations between Alzheimer's or you know, something severe and degenerative like that. I've heard of COVID fatigue, and I've heard of you know, some sort of lingering effects, but that's rather concerning.
Yeah, here's the study, the nice easy total. 6-month neurological and psychiatric outcomes in 236,379 survivors of COVID, a retrospective cohort study using electronic health records. This has been published in, what's the journal called? I can't see the journal's name here, but an open access journal. And if I can just quickly find the findings, estimated incidence of neurological or psychiatric diagnosis in the following 6 months was 33.62%. with 12% receiving the first such diagnosis. For patients who needed to an intensive care, it says ITU, but ICU would call it, estimated incidence was 46%, and for first diagnosis, 25%. Individual diagnoses, the whole COVID, estimated incidence of 0.5% for intracranial hemorrhage, 2 to 10% for ischemic stroke, 11% for Parkinsonism, and 0.67% for dementia, 17% for anxiety, 1.4% to psychotic disorder. In other words, it's a bit worse than the flu. So I look at that thing. I am not going to get this disease for as long as I can possibly delay it, until hopefully we have antivirals, and you can do something with the antiviral to minimize the potential long-term damage.
I have I think he's an epidemiologist that we put on the channel as a part of the COVID and climate. And so there's this fellow, I think he's with UCLA Berkeley or something. Anyways, he's a researcher, a PhD researcher. And I'm gonna maybe ask him about a few of these things and post a few things on the channel. If you can please put the link to the paper in the description, and then
sure. I'll do that
for the viewers.
Where's the chat? Hang on. Where is the?
Oh, you're going to be in the bottom right hand corner. There's
I got you. I see it there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it's actually, I'll find the paper itself. I'm not sure of what the link would be, but I'll actually just post a snip of it so you can, if it does snipping here, let's see.
And Scott's going to have to actually move to more of the center of the camera, unless he's going to grace his new wife with an appearance on the show tonight. Anyways, before we pass the mic on over to Scott, I'm going to ask, do you think that, is there any indication that your DNA centric, not inoculation, but you know what I'm talking about.
The vaccine I had back in March 2020.
Yeah. Is there anything that makes, is there any data that would say that you have, I guess, a higher degree of protection because?
No, the only way I find out is by catching the damn thing, and I don't intend doing that research.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you've kind of put me in a tailspin, because last week, and I think you mentioned something about, you said it was similar to the Spanish flu, and it gave me more of an optimistic feeling, not a false sense of security at all, but the fact that we may be heading towards a positive outcome socially, or in terms of the progression of the pandemic, right? But I guess it's endemic, so it's kind of here to stay. Is that
it's here to stay? We're not going to get rid of it. I mean, if you have to think of anybody on the planet who's suffering as an expert from what we've been through, it'd be Anir Daryan, who's the guy who's established endcoronavirus.org. And as I've mentioned a few times, was the person who led one of the people leading the successful campaign to suppress the Ebola outbreak in Africa in 2014. And he was, screaming, everybody, just 6 weeks lockdown, iron hard lockdown, but 6 weeks, and we can eliminate this thing from the surface of the planet. And instead, we've got over 500,000 recorded deaths, about 17 million estimated excess deaths. 300 million cases recorded, probably more than 1 billion actually cases. It's now endemic as us. It's passed across to other animals. We're stuck with it. And you look at it and think, this is the difference between a society which lets its true experts decide what to do versus narcissistic politicians who don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And now we're in this thing where we're going to have to live with this damn thing for the rest of the existence of humanity, probably. And we could have got rid of it.
It seems to be the theme, the underlying theme, isn't it? I mean, it's a COVID and climate correlations.
Yeah,
welcome to another episode.
Actually, speaking of which, have you watched Don't Look Up yet?
Yes, I was gonna bring that up. That's just so great.
It
No,
is, yeah.
yeah, that was.
You got to be in. I mean, I've just read it. The guy. There's been quite a few film critics writing disparaging reviews of it. There's the film critic for The Guardian said it's a dreadful movie, and I let that go through to the keeper. But the economics correspondent for The Guardian in Australia said he's into 40 minutes. That was enough for him. He stopped watching it. I said, well, that's enough for me to shut down my Guardian subscription as well, which I did, and copied my shutdown of my paying for The Guardian. And I've been knocked by a few people. I was reading an extreme reaction. I said, "Holy fuck, I'm living that movie," you know. And also, it wouldn't that alone wasn't enough. You know, my paper in Globalizations about the ludicrous work that economists have done on climate change. I was in touch with George Monbiot, sent him a pre-publication. He was going to publish the story on it. Nothing has happened, and that's 1.5 years ago. And I've sort of asked a couple of polite questions. I haven't heard back. So I thought, well, I haven't heard back by being polite. Maybe I'll hear back by being rude. So I thought maybe a couple of insults to The Guardian in Twitter and George, and we'll see what happens. Maybe I'll find out why no story was run.
Yeah, it's a shame. Sure, let's talk about the movie. I mean, I think it's, you know, I mean, spoiler alerts. I mean, is there such a thing? I mean, we know it's a parody. You know, I mean, if you don't get that, if you can get through the whole movie and not understand that it's you know, a parody about climate change and the reality, that's you know, quite obvious. But I think somebody like Leonardo DiCaprio is, you know, somebody who's so I guess passionate, committed, frustrated, all in one fell swoop about climate change, right? And the situation, the politics, just the whole fiasco. What kind of movie would you do to get the point
exactly.
across?
I mean, if this is the old those who can do, those who can't criticize. I won't say teach anymore. I think we disparage teachers, but it's the critics who come across and say, "Oh, I would have done it differently." Well, how the fuck would you have done it? Thanks very much. You know, I mean, anybody says that these days, write me an alternative script that's more effective, then I'll listen to you. I thought it was very well done, and what it really hit home on is the frustrations that I feel and that I know so many other people working in climate change do feel about how this is trivialized. Now, I know more than 99% of people, including those in climate change, as to why it's been trivialized. The Economist have had a huge role in trivializing, and I'm going after them for it. So some side is saying, why doesn't this get through? And I'm saying, well, it's because they're reading The Economist rather than reading you. So I've got a special insight on that damn thing. But watching, you know, Professor Mindy felt like my life. I mean, you go on national TV, you report the world's going to be driven extinct in 6 months, and they start discussing your hair color. And that trivialization, they captured it beautifully. And then some of the critics have complained about it. They might as well have been, they should have done, they should have shot their piece on camera and donated it to the movie. It would have saved them asking actors to pretend to be journalists. So it is incredibly frustrating to watch, and it hit home because it is so much like the lived experience of so many people working on climate change.
Yeah, Scott, have you seen the Don't Look Up on Netflix?
No.
Worth watching.
Yeah, it's worth watching.
I'll write it down.
So we've got a couple. We've got a backlog of 2 episodes. We're doing some editing, and I think we're going to put a little bit more editing into the episodes. And so this is going to be exciting. I thought tonight we would kind of keep it a little light. I mean, it's maybe a little bit too late for that.
We are talking about a movie.
Yeah. But I thought, you know, there's a couple things, you know, remember last episode, we actually talked about the meeting place in Australia that was taken over by the quote, the Jesus freaks. I think it was something like that. Right. And the idea that I wanted to get kind of an insight into theology from a standpoint of Steve Keen, you know, how you approach it, you know, what your thoughts are about religion, what how do you approach
Well,
that? What are,
I was raised a Catholic,
Mhm.
which is always a good start. And there's I remember a guy at Sydney University, Chris Sidoti, who was president of the Students' Representative Council when I was there, did a survey at one stage of political activists on campus, and of them, about 60% were Catholic and 30% were Jewish, and the other 10% were Protestant. Now, if you look at the population distribution, it's virtually the other way around. It's about 60% Protestant, 30% Catholic, 10% Jewish. But the activist ones were the Catholics and the Jews. And he said it must relate something to the underlying philosophy of the religions, that Protestantism tends to be more about, doing good work through doing good deeds through making money, is more of a Protestant thing. And the Catholics tend to have this rather religious zeal, and ditto Jewish people. So there is a way, and there is a way that religion affects activism, without a doubt. But when you looked at it, you commented about Catholics, and you said it either turns you into a conservative or a radical. And because when you look at the split in the activist students on campus, the Catholics were sort of predominantly conservative, but there are a handful who are radical, and I was one of the latter. And that just seems to be the way. So the religion, getting taught religion as a child, gives you a reference point that can drive you politically one way or the other, depending on what life circumstances end up being for you. And so, like, I see an incredible need for ethical education, and we tend to do that through religion. But one of my best mates is a profound agnostic. I call myself an atheist and agnostic when pressed. He is extremely atheist, and for that reason, he's teaching ethics classes at school. But he said the kids need to be taught ethics from somebody who doesn't believe in God, because you need to separate the two. So, like, overall, one of the reasons I drifted politically from being conservative to otherwise is that I realised that, in terms of whether people were people of faith or not, had almost no bearing on whether I liked their ethics or not, whether their ethics were actually what I thought were decent. And that's partly why I ended up being agnostic. But for a lot of people, the religion is the source of their ethics. And I look at Buddhist people in particular, and there's something about the Buddhist religion that generates a belief in a circular lifestyle, and therefore you're going to come back, so you better behave well this lifestyle, this life cycle, and something in the Catholics about being generous. And I like both of those, but when I look at what's been done in the name of religion, I'm no great enthusiast.
That's probably a good point to end it. That's that summarizes it, quite nicely. And then that separation from church and state seems to be, something that, sometimes I fear, especially in the United States, that
Separation or lack of separation?
Well, that we may have like a resurgence of religious fundamentalism, sneaking back into our societies. And I've been studying a lot about collapse. In particular, I want to actually bring up Jared Diamond's book, Collapse. He goes into quite a detailed explanation about Australia, which I thought
Does
was,
he?
Yeah.
I've forgotten. I read the book a long time ago. But collapse of the Aboriginal culture, or collapse of white culture?
He talks about collapse in general, so the study of collapse, and it seems.
Yeah, I've read the book, but it's about 20 years since I have.
Yeah, and I was I had to pick it up again as well. I think I had read it about 3 or 4 years ago, but this is the thing I think that happens with identity and great literature. I'm not necessarily saying that this book is a great book, but I mean, Jared Diamond is an excellent author. And he takes various different cultures, and he likes looking at Australia in particular because from I guess all vantage points and perspectives, Australia is a modernized society, and so it's a really good example to look at collapse and the potential of collapse from a modern standpoint, not necessarily the I'm not going to be politically correct here, but the third world economies or countries, that's sometimes dichotomized when we're comparing the haves and have-nots. Right. And so with Australia, it's really interesting because effectively the country is a desert, right? And it's populated with the urban centers predominantly, right?
Yeah. There's a great book on which again I must say I haven't read this one, called The Fringe Dwellers. I love the title, and what it says about Australia is we live on the fringe of the continent. If you take the at most 200-mile wide strip around the coast of Australia, and you only need to do the bottom half of the country fundamentally, because the top half tends to be almost uninhabited anyway. That 200-mile wide strip would hold 90% of the population, if not more.
Yeah.
And so we have this. It's about 3 million square miles, but of that 3 million square miles, probably 100,000 square miles are heavily inhabited, and the rest is almost vacant.
Yeah. Well, there was a few other takeaways that I thought were quite interesting, and one of them actually had to do with sheep.
With sheep?
Yeah, with sheep.
Got about 250 million of those from memory.
A huge billion-dollar industry actually in Australia.
Yep.
And from what I understand, a more natural farmed or cultivated animal would be something like the kangaroo, say for meat, for example, right?
Yeah.
But there's stigmas around kangaroo meat, and I guess because they're kind of cute, or they're viewed as being cute animals. I know that not in Australia necessarily. Like they're kind of a menace, I guess. Is that, would you say that some people?
Oh no, I mean, well, they're intriguing animals. I've had a few run-ins with kangaroos over my life. Not as many people in the country would have, but you end up having quite a respect for them. They're pretty intelligent, not as intelligent as some other mammals, but they've got a bit of brain power there. They will react to you in various ways. I remember once we managed to on a holiday, we camped out at a place called Pepperley Beach, I think it's called, but it actually has a huge kangaroo population, and the kangaroos lie there amongst people's washing on the lines. We didn't like that. We climbed over the ridge to the other side, and we had to go through a whole wall of mosquitoes to get there. Came down and camped out in the night, and woke up to find not a kangaroo, a wallaby, which is a related species, which was about 5 foot tall, and I mean, built like a brick shit house. Looking at our gear, and I came out, and he bounded away, and in one leap he was about 5 meters away, and I sort of encouraged him back. He had a bit of food, and he then leapt right in front of me, and then I gave him the food. He took it out of my hand and walked away. I bounced away. But there's an acknowledgement of species there. And another time, my first wife and I were down in Tasmania going for a walk, on a famous walk down there, and came back to find a whole lot of little wallabies about yay tall, maybe a foot tall. And we gave one of them some food, and he's eating the food. He's going. In other words, get close enough to give me the food. Don't get too far. I'll bite your fucking finger off. And it was really quite classic passive aggressive. He wanted to get the food. He was making sure he wasn't going to be picked up. So they're interesting animals. And like when you see them traveling in the countryside, particularly big ones, there's a species called the big red. They grow to about 6.5 to 7 foot tall. And we were watching one of them as a child. We were being driven in a Land Rover towards a country property owned by one of my grand aunts, and we were watching it. I think he's bounding straight towards us, but there was a 4 foot high barbed wire fence between us and him and the car, and then on the other side is a sort of a dirt track, but it would have been something approaching 30 foot from one side to the one barbed wire fence to the other. He simply bounded over the roof and over both just barbed wire fences and kept on going. And they are completely adapted to the Australian environment. So the females are always pregnant.
Mm.
Yeah. But if there's a drought, they'll reabsorb their children.
Sorry?
Yeah. They when they give birth, the baby has to climb out of a I don't know how they actually get out of the vaginal cavity, but they get out, they climb up the fur and attach to a teat. Okay. So when they're to that stage, of course, they're live and they're in it. But while they're still inside the womb, they're permanently pregnant. And then if there's plenty of feed, they'll go through to birth. And if there's not plenty of feed, the body reabsorbs the child.
Wow.
So they're perfectly evolved for a desert continent.
You imagine the maybe I'm being a little crass here, but imagine the abortion conversation if that was our biology.
It wouldn't even exist.
Yeah. It would
It's been a
solve
bad
the whole
harvest this
issue.
year, so I'm not going to give birth.
Oh, I don't mean to make light of it, but sometimes the eternal reoccurrence, speaking of the Buddhist philosophy we were talking about earlier, this argument just seems to be, coming back again and again and again, and it's just like, oh man,
Well, they're the classic in that sense. Like they're a prey species. There used to be carnivorous kangaroos. There were megafauna in Australia, and probably wiped out when the Aborigines arrived, but they may have been wiped out by climate change. We're not really sure. But they were up to, I've got to work in meters, 3 to 4 meters tall. And some of them, I think they were some which were carnivores. But all the surviving kangaroos are herbivores. And like normally herbivores will suffer if there's a drought, then there's a population that will starve to death. And they'll still be giving birth while they're starving, but the kangaroos, no, they reabsorb their young. So they move with the undulations of the climate very successfully. So they're a very well adapted animal.
Wow, that's really impressive. Yeah, I'm going to encourage you to look at the at that book again because there's
Scott's getting me one to look at as well, which I said I'd look at, and I haven't done so. So I'm feeling guilty here.
Do you have an Audible account?
No, I don't.
Because if you, I know from videos, if you, when you watch videos, you watch them on 2x speed, don't you? Because you're kind of a busy guy.
1.5 to 2 times, depending on how fast the speaker is. Yeah.
Right. So I know I consume a lot of books with Audible, and I can just put the headphones on. I can go for a walk, and I can just listen to the book. Right. And so that's really good. So, and of course you can turn the speed up as well. I know that if I really want to get into a book, I buy the book and also listen to the Audible, but, I would recommend that. And, especially the section on Australia.
Okay.
Yeah. The reason
I think my copy of Collapse is probably, back in, Amsterdam. Unfortunately, let's see if I'll just see if it's on my Kindle, but I don't think so. I think it's actually a physical copy that's back in Amsterdam. Unfortunately,
I have a question about the 200-mile strip in the southern Australia. How come they didn't colonize the northern shore? What's so great about the southern shore?
It's too tropical, and it's like you're in the actual tropical band. So there's above 23 degrees, you're in the tropical region, and then you have tropical storms. And there's Aboriginals have definitely colonized that part of the there's Aboriginal cultures up there well and truly. But in terms of white culture, they just haven't done it. So there's a handful of towns. Darwin is a town in the Northern Territory, but the population of the Northern Territory is in the hundreds of thousands, and that's probably twice the size of Texas. Okay. And it's mainly, a lot of it's savanna, but the top section is very tropical and subject to monsoons and so on. So that section is just not inhabited. If you look, the biggest inhabited, like city more than 1 million people in that roughly in that region is Brisbane. And I think Brisbane is just below the Tropic of is the Tropic of Cancer or Tropic of Capricorn? Tropic of Capricorn, I think. So we're sort of subtropical around a band about 200 miles wide, and that's 90% of the population plus.
Thanks.
Interesting. It's weird to be back here again and enjoying Australian scenery because it is so desert adapted. Even where we are, like Sydney gets a rainfall of about 40 inches a year, which is quite substantial, but much higher evaporation than Europe because Sydney's in pretty much the location of Libya. Okay. And everything is dry. Whereas in Thailand, I don't think Bangkok gets a lot more rain than that. For some strange reason, it's much moister. So all the leaves are sort of very green and very moist, and like the surface of the leaf is reflective. Whereas here they're all matte finish. And the plant, it's an intriguing place to be back in again, getting used to because I haven't been here for 7 years in terms of actually living here.
Much drier and arid, being a desert sort of.
Well, it's the coastal strip. Again, it's the reason for inhabiting the coastal strip is that around there's what's called the Great Dividing Range, and that pretty much goes from the very north of the country to the bottom on the eastern seaboard. And then because it's not very high, it maxes out at 7,000 feet, which is Mount Kosciuszko. But because they've got this rising landscape, then when the clouds come across from the Pacific, they dump in that region. So this area, like Sydney, gets 40 inches. Brisbane probably gets 50 or 60 inches. It's quite substantial rainfall. And even with the evaporation, you get enough rainfall to maintain very good sedentary agriculture. But on the other side of the Great Dividing Range, you drop from 60 inches to 10 and even lower. And then you've got dry crop farming, and you can get enormous stations. So, for example, my grandmother and one of her grand aunts inherited 1/4 of a country property, and that 1/4 was 3,500 acres, and the population of it was 100 cattle and I think about 3,000 sheep.
Wow.
So it's very, very Spartan, and and in that case, kangaroos would be better because kangaroos are designed to forage the land. But controlling a kangaroo is a bit hard when they can jump 4 meters in the sky.
Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing. I was reading a book from John Taylor Gatto. He's somebody that he was a New York middle school teacher, and he I guess he had a book called Dumbing Down America, I think, something like that. So you kind of get the idea of where he's going, with the state of the educational system in America, at least.
Yeah.
And I was reading one of his books, and he was talking about that book Collapse. And he was saying that, and I haven't been able to find it in the book at all, but he was saying, or at least this particular claim. So what he was saying is that the sheep that were put on the land for the farmers had to have English grass in order for them to graze on. Now, the problem with the English grass and the nature of the sheep is they will eat it down to the nub.
They actually tear it out from the roots ultimately. Yeah.
Exactly. And so what happens is that it salinates, if that's the right word, the soil, and it becomes very salty, and the salt drifts into the ocean, right? Yeah. And so we've all heard of the bleaching of the corals. But he had said that this particular book by Jared Diamond said that the sheep and that grazing actually contributed to the bleaching of the corals. And I thought, what?
That can happen through the fertilizer as well, because
Really?
you're putting superphosphate fertilizer to grow the soil. I mean, I have friends who are soil experts, but I'm not one myself, obviously. But what they tell me is that what fertilizer often does is just basically kill all the existing bacteria, and then give you this, the superphosphate, the stuff that you absorb, particularly phosphorus, that the plants desperately need. And what you're doing is effectively turning into a desert and then just processing the oil to provide the nutrients for the plants. So you're not at all using the actual natural characteristics of the soil. And then a lot of that washes off. So that washes off into the, particularly in Queensland, washes off into the ocean, and that then damages the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah. This is okay. So yeah, I picked up the book to try and hear, or to try and to catch that point, right? And so I'm gonna have to actually read it again and stuff like that. So, but that was very interesting, and I thought there was a lot of value in that section on Australia. So yeah, worth picking up. Could you talk a little bit about the division of economics that is biology centric? There's a name for a biology centric economics, isn't there?
Biophysical economics, economics, yeah. And well, that's really what I'm working on, or trying to work on. So there've been people, particularly Charlie Hall, who's a friend, and not that we've met, but we meet through the Zoom quite regularly. The Charlie Hall is probably the leading person who tried to develop the idea to say we have to have an economics based on biology and the physical world. And what I've done in a sense, with my contribution to that is showing the unique role of energy in the production function. So if you have an idea of talking about how production occurs, then what I did was show her formally how that should be done, having energy as an input to capital and to labor. But Charlie's been working for a long, long time and saying, well, what we're really doing is this industrial civilization is taking supplies of energy, which are concentrated, sunlight, fundamentally, most of them, and using those to enable industrial processes that give us a level of energy consumption well above the background of the energy consumption of biological species on the planet. And unless we maintain that, then our civilization will collapse. But then to do that, we're running. It's getting harder and harder to pull up the energy. And what I think Charlie originated the idea of energy return on energy invested, saying that it's only possible to have a advanced civilization if the energy you need to input is substantially less than the energy you get out from any energy source. And so he's been tracking the rise of our civilization, industrial civilization, began when we realized not just how much energy was stored in coal and oil, but how to exploit that energy and then get it to turn mechanical devices and run chemical processes and so on. And when you look in the early days of coal, has still got a very high energy return and energy invested, something like about 20 or 30 to 1. Oil began at about 200 to 1. And it's the most dense energy effective substance we've ever had outside of nuclear power. And even that nuclear power has got a far higher energy density, but you've got to refine this stuff in the first place. So oil, the old my favorite scene in the Beverly Hillbillies is Jed fires a shotgun at a rabbit and out comes the oil out of the ground. Well, the shotgun out of the rabbit, I don't know how many megajoules would be involved in the shotgun, but it's not many. And then you get petajoules of oil coming out of the ground. So our civilization was built, it started exploiting that way back in the early 1800s, or mid 1800s, the oil. And then at that stage, there's enormous headroom. We could grow into that. Well, now we've optimized for that, and now it's coming down because to find the oil is a far harder task than firing a shotgun at a rabbit these days. And it tends to be in several kilometers of ocean. And the energy input you need is substantial. So what you're getting out is much, much smaller. And the only one that's really left in any like sufficient scale for us to be able to continue growing at the current rate without exhausting it for more than 100 years is coal, and that's by far the most polluting in terms of carbon dioxide. So the biophysical economics focuses on all those dilemmas and says we have to look at how we interface with the real world. And economic theory ignores the whole damn lot and just has, you produce output by combining labor and capital and technology, and that's about as sophisticated as they get. Technology is the economic word meaning magic.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna put a link to a paper in the video. But there's an interesting paper that I read, and I know how you like extrapolations. You've used them in your work. But this extrapolation was, if we continued on a similar energy growth extrapolation, we would outpace the energy of the sun in 300 years.
Yeah, in fact, there's actually a guy I would like to have a conversation with. I just recently met Tom Murphy, and Tom Murphy runs the blog that's called what's the name of the blog? Just Do the Math, and he had this wonderful paper called "Finite Physicist Meets Exponential Economist," and what he mentioned in that blog post was that it's rather different. That just because of the second law of thermodynamics, we generate waste heat. Okay, it has nothing to do with global warming. It's just simply to exploit energy, you must generate a certain amount of waste. You can work out the radiative forcing coming out of that. And he said at a 2.3% rate of growth of energy consumption per year, which was chosen, A, because it's pretty much what we've been doing, but B, because it means we increase our energy demands by a factor of 10 every century. So 1 century is 10, 2 centuries is 100, 3 centuries is 1,000, 4 is 10,000. You said in 400 years, that waste energy generation alone will raise the temperature of the planet to 100 degrees Celsius average.
Yeah.
So that's the key. So even if you leave out global warming, completely forget it. Just look at energy consumption growing over time. It means that in about 380 years, the planet would be unlivable because with an exponential process the last 20 years is the doubles and doubles again. Yeah. So the base, we would get to the point where life can't exist at the planet in less than 4 centuries. And this comes out having a biophysical perspective on the economy, which neoclassical economists completely lack. And so they are happy to integrate their utility functions out to infinity.
Yeah.
And the thing is, infinity and this planet cuts off in 400 years.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I want to paint a picture for you. This is called the Steve Keen Corporation. Okay. So in the Steve Keen Corporation, you have Daniel, who's a lieutenant, Scott, pick your rank. And so so you've got the lieutenant that comes up to the general and he says, okay, Mr. Keen, or I don't know, sir, or whatever I say to you. I say, I've approached that physicist. He's declined because based off of our channel, we're a waste of his time, basically, in not so many nights. Well,
not so many very years. Direct.
Yeah. And so at this point, it's elevated to the office of Steve Keen. And so my recommendation would be for you to personally reach out to him. He has responded, but he basically said we're not worth his time. So
this is Tom. You actually have spoken to him.
Email correspondence.
Okay.
I hold nothing against him, but I mean that's fair because there's a lot of people out there.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'll let him get up. I think we should be getting several thousand views before we try dragging somebody on as busy as Tom, because Tom has formed and I've joined it. In fact, I'm the first extra member outside the original group that formed a thing called PLAN, standing for Planetary Limits. And the group of 5 physicists formed it, and they then put out this set of levels for people to be activists and collaborators and so on. And I was the first accepted collaborator outside the initial group. And I just know how busy he is. So, until we can actually reach out, I will decline that and say, let's wait till we have an audience that makes it worth his while.
Okay. Oh, that's fair. That's fair. But Okay, I can't remember what my next point was, but I think that. Oh, I wanted to talk about the passing of an intellectual giant on December 26th. E.O. Wilson passed away at 92. And if my humble plea is, if you're not looking at some of his work in terms of consilience, in terms of biodiversity, please do so. I think he was a remarkable man with an incredible amount of research and vision. I think he was risky in terms of his project on consilience. It's a term that means jumping together. It was a term that was invented, I guess, by William Ewell. I think Ewell. The same person that came up with the term science.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's about he wrote a book called Consilience. I've done an entire series on it, a very loose kind of conversational sort of series called Consciousness and Consilience. But I'm definitely a fan of E.O. Wilson. I think he was visionary. I think he is maybe underappreciated in certain aspects of the academic community, and it really puzzles me as to why. But I mean, I think he took risks, for somebody to tackle projects like consciousness and human nature and all of these kinds of things. But he's a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner. He was educated in Harvard. He's best known for his scientific work as the ant guy. He discovered I don't know how many species of ants and did some amazing work. And so his work on biodiversity, I think, is second to none. His book Half Earth is amazing. I think he's somebody that
and that's basically saying we should leave half the Earth for the other species.
Yeah,
fundamentally, which I think is, I think we should be leaving 80% for them. But yeah, it's absolutely wise. We humans are just so intrusive. We take over every last space.
Yeah,
if we can, which is why we end up destroying most of the planet.
Yeah, I mean, and in that even in that argument, okay, there's still further conversation that needs to happen, because there's still a fundamental divide or bifurcation between the two ideas of whether we have integrated spaces or whether we have completely isolated spaces, right, with nature. And so, there's still a lot of work to be done. One thing I would point out is that the work from conservationists, I think, is rather impressive. I think we have a fair amount of the world that has been designated as conservation areas. It's quite remarkable. There's a relatively significant percentage of the world has already been put aside for conservation, and I think that's a great start. I just think we need to.
How much of a percentage of the world?
In terms of conservation, I think we're. This is just a guess, but I think we're at 13 to 15%. I think.
But I saw another statement recently saying that the percentage of the world's land surface that hasn't been changed by humans is about 3%. Even if we've got conservation areas, as if 75% of them are human affected in a substantial way. So the whole idea, like saying half the Earth should be reserved for other species, maybe even that's not enough. It's certainly we should be doing that, because we should be seeing ourselves as custodians of life, not exploiters of life, and that's what we've done. And of course, by exploiting life, we ultimately destroy the capacity to sustain it, and that's the scary thing about the situation we're in now. So, to be leading that sort of, as Schumacher did as well, to lead the argument we should be leaving a large part of the planet for non-human species is incredibly important. And we'll look back on people like that as visionaries rather than people that are currently ignored, which is at the moment, good words in terms of it being turned into actual behavior. We're miles from doing it.
I did a user interface study with the people that designed the Half Earth Project website.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it's quite remarkable. The website technology, I think it's on halfearth.com. I'll post the link, but it actually identifies these areas, and in quite a beautiful graphical way. I would say my recommendation to get things started is I wonder how much of that is a working heuristic as well. I mean, if we drive towards the Half Earth designation with the key identified ecologically and biodiverse sensitive areas of the world, it'd be a great check mark to have. And I think, personally, rather than quibbling over whether it's 50 or 60 or 70 or 80, it's a nice heuristic. Half Earth, get behind it. And start refining that plan. I think some of the things that can happen with academics is that we can get, caught up in some of the early stages of terminology and heuristics or, marketability, right? It's like, okay, get on with it, just get on with it, and I should say it's not just the Earth; it's also the ocean habitats too, right? It's percentages of ocean and as well as land mass as well, right? So yeah, and I think the key is that as a biologist, what E.O. Wilson was really good at was observing the biodiversity around you, right? So I remember one anecdotal story that he would say about somebody complaining about ants in their home. A lady would come up and say, well, I've got ants in my house. What do I do? Basically, it was like, leave them alone.
Yeah.
Like they're just leave them. Like you don't have to do anything with them.
To give you the other extreme for economics, I've talked quite frequently about Nordhaus's survey of so-called experts on global warming back in 1994. And I'm sure, I'd lay odds that the relevant expert for this quote was Larry Summers. Any outrageous quote in the economics paper, you find it almost always Larry Summers. And he said, you're talking about how much they valued biodiversity as part of the value of the planet. You said, in my answer, biodiversity is irrelevant, quote unquote. I don't care about ants except for drugs. Now that's the mentality that gets you to be the chair of Harvard, in economics. So yeah, complete ignorance of the role of biodiversity is almost a prerequisite for becoming a famous economist.
And if that's any indication about how fellows treat each other in Harvard,
it is. Yep.
And I've heard horror stories about, how brutal academics can be to each other, in terms of, I guess, like, validating their work, or I don't understand that.
Well, it comes back to the religion question you asked me to begin with, because, like, again, this great mate of mine who's a devout atheist, he is always juxtaposing the behavior of scientists to the behavior of religious people. And my perspective is they're very similar. The difference being that a religious person has their great book, and that's what they refer back to, whatever the Bible says or the Quran or whatever the document is. Whereas scientific people say, this is my belief and I want to prove it using the reality. And so they're testing their theory against reality all the time. And if there's a conflict, then that causes a breakdown, which is not immediate. It takes a long time before they accept that their paradigm is wrong, and often as clanks that they never do. But that process of having to validate against the real world is what separates scientific beliefs from religious beliefs. But still, fundamentally, you're working on beliefs. Now, if you're in an academic setting and you challenge somebody else's theory without necessarily having an experiment that says you can't answer this experiment, it's like having a fight between Muslims and Christians, or Hindus and Christians, Hindus and Muslims. It's not pretty. And that's probably a large part of why the fights in academia are so vicious, because even though you might claim to have a scientific foundation, you're still defending your beliefs against attack by another person. And in most other spheres of human endeavor. That doesn't happen. You don't find yourself having a Muslim debating a Christian face to face in an institution in anywhere other than a university where it's a Marxist versus a Hayekian and so on.
Right. Yeah, that's a shame. Do you think that fundamentally that's is it partially flawed because of having to defend a thesis and in terms of graduating, basically?
No, that's one of my favorite books of all time is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Kuhn.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to people defending their hypotheses. I see humans as being belief generating and sharing organisms. And we don't make webs, we make beliefs and we share them. And that's fundamentally why we've been so powerful as a species, because those beliefs means we can do collective action on a scale that other creatures simply can't do. So that's our great strength, but it's also our great weakness. But what Kuhn found is he accepted Popper's theory of how science progresses. So if you've read Popper, you'll know that he talks about starting from a bold conjecture. Like that's literally a quote from Popper, a bold conjecture. And then as a scientist, you go out and try to prove the conjecture wrong. Okay? That's his sort of vision of what scientists do. So you make a bold conjecture and then you try to disprove it. And once you've disproven the bold conjecture, you've got rid of the stuff that isn't right. You've got more that is right. And you sort of in a pyramidal way, you stack on and you find your reality. Well, Kuhn accepted that. And he's doing, I think, his PhD thesis on the evolution of or the development of the Copernican theory of astronomy. Mm-hmm. And as part of that, you have and then Popper says this as well, you start from myth. So we begin with myths. We believe that the sun is towed across the sky by Zeus, whatever else. But we then prove it wrong and then go on to the next one and the next one and the next one. But it means you start from myth and you slowly progress towards science. And when Kuhn looked at what the Ptolemaic astronomers were doing, he said he simply couldn't believe that was just myth making, because even though there was like a totally false model of how the universe operates, they were doing intricate measurements, and that they were behaving like he saw modern scientists behaving when they were trying to extend quantum mechanics or relativity and so on. So he found he couldn't describe them as being mythological, even though their core paradigm was a myth. So he said, well, what do scientists actually do? They might come up with a bold conjecture, but rather than trying to destroy it, they try to confirm it. And then what happens with science over time is you will succeed in confirming it to various levels, but then there will be anomalies you can't explain. And the anomalies will lead to, if there are anomalies you can't resolve within the paradigm, then ultimately there's a breakdown of the paradigm. But the people who believe the paradigm continue to believe it. Well, there's one of the most ironic papers I've ever read was Popper's reaction to Kuhn. And having made the argument, you have a bold conjecture, and then you go and try to disprove it. And of course, the person who disproved it must be really, exalted. Popper was really pissed at Kuhn and tried to reject Kuhn's theory, even though it was, in one sense, Kuhn was doing precisely what Popper said scientists do. And the most resistant person to Kuhn's theory of scientific revolutions was Popper, which is a classic case that actually proves Kuhn's point.
Yeah. I love that irony. That's very cool. Well, we're right at the top of the hour, Steve, and okay. There's a paradigm shift for you right there. So thank you, and
welcome. And I'll try to read those books, guys. But I'm just busy writing policy documents for the New Liberals right now. So I've got the climate change one pretty much finished. I've got to write the housing and economic one now before next Wednesday. So I'll see how I do.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Happy New Year.
You too.
Happy New Year.
You too. Okay. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.